Welcome to a place where love is not a fairy tale, but a storm that shakes the soul. Here, every story is told through the eyes of a heart that has lived it, raw, unfiltered, and trembling with truth. This is where forbidden attraction awakens what was thought long buried, where guilt and fear collide with the pull of passion, where longing breaks into surrender under the weight of a single night, and where love transforms into something so deep it changes the meaning of intimacy, belonging, and truth forever. These are not just stories, they are confessions, whispered from the soul of someone who dared to feel. If you've ever wanted to be seen, touched, and awakened in ways you never thought possible, you are home now. Stay with me, because once this journey begins, there is no turning back. It began in the smallest, quietest ways, the kind that almost slip by unnoticed. A simple conversation in the kitchen, laughter over something trivial, a moment of eye contact held longer than it should have been. At first, it was easy to dismiss, to brush aside as nothing more than warmth between two people who cared for one another in ordinary ways. But somewhere beneath those casual exchanges, something stirred, something that hadn't been felt in years. It was a spark so faint at the beginning that it seemed harmless, yet once noticed, it lingered like a whisper impossible to unhear. There had been many years of silence inside, a dullness that had settled into the heart like dust on forgotten furniture. The motions of life carried on, but passion, the kind that makes every breath feel alive, had long ago slipped away, and then, suddenly, without warning, his presence disturbed that silence. His voice carried a warmth that lingered after he had gone, and his smile had a way of piercing through walls that had been built over time. The forbidden nature of it made the heart resist at first. How could such thoughts even appear? How could admiration shift so dangerously toward something deeper? It was wrong, wasn't it? That's what the mind whispered. Yet the heart refused to listen. The more time spent together, the harder it became to deny. A gentle hand brushing against another, the way laughter could dissolve into silence that felt charged with something unspoken. These small details became heavy with meaning. Each moment seemed to carry a question left unanswered, and the silence between words became louder than the words themselves. It wasn't just attraction, it was awakening. The way he noticed things no one else did, the way his eyes seemed to see through everything, left the soul trembling. Years of being unseen suddenly vanished under the weight of his gaze. It wasn't supposed to happen, yet it did. A heart long asleep stirred awake, and the body followed, betraying the mind with quickened breaths and restless nights. At first, every effort was made to bury it, to smother the flame before it grew. Smiles were measured, conversations carefully controlled, and distance was created where closeness once came naturally. But desire is patient. It waits, it lingers, it thrives in silence, and every attempt to suppress it only made it stronger. Nights became restless, replaying moments that seemed insignificant by daylight yet carried the weight of eternity in memory. A hand brushing against the small of the back, the softness in his voice when he said a name, the way his eyes linger, each fragment replayed like a song on repeat, impossible to silence. It was the way he looked, not just at the surface but beneath it, that left everything undone. In his eyes there was no judgment, no expectation, just raw recognition, and that recognition stirred something long buried, something thought to be gone forever. It wasn't just desire for touch, it was the longing to be seen, to be known, to be felt. And that longing, once awakened, demanded to be acknowledged. The quiet bond began to carry weight. Every glance was a question, every smile a risk, every silence a confession. The air shifted when he walked into the room, and even the most ordinary tasks became charged with meaning. Pouring a glass of water, passing by in the hallway, brushing shoulders, all of it throbbed with unspoken words. What began as harmless connection had become something impossible to ignore, and yet beneath it all there was guilt. The mind fought hard, reminding of boundaries, of lines that should not be crossed. But guilt was weak compared to the intensity of what was felt. The heart raced at his nearness, skin burned with memory long after he left, and the soul ached with a hunger that had nothing to do with the body and everything to do with being alive again. The forbidden only made it more intoxicating. Knowing it wasn't supposed to happen only sharpened every glance, every word, every accidental brush of skin. It was as if the universe itself conspired to remind that what was once thought dead could live again. Passion had been buried for years, and now, without permission, it surged back to life, fierce and unstoppable. It was in the quiet moments that the truth hit hardest. Sitting alone after he left, the echo of his presence still filling the room, the heart pounded with an intensity that left no space for denial. Feelings had shifted, and there was no turning back. What began as comfort had become desire. What began as closeness had become longing. And what began as harmless connection had become the most dangerous truth of all. He had awakened something that would never again be put to sleep. The first step into that awareness was terrifying, but also liberating. For the first time in years, life no longer felt muted. Every sound, every color, every moment carried new sharpness. The weight of loneliness that had been carried for so long lifted in his presence, and the body remembered what it meant to be wanted, even if the wanting remained unspoken. It wasn't love yet, but it was the beginning of something undeniable. The crack in the walls, the opening of the heart, the breath before surrender. The quiet bond had shifted, and though words had not yet been spoken, both knew that something irreversible had already begun. And there was no going back. It should have been simple to walk away, to quiet the thoughts before they grew, to treat it all as nothing more than imagination. Yet, the more it was resisted, the stronger it became. The heart raced at the sound of his footsteps. The air changed when he entered a room, and the silence between words carried a weight that neither dared to name. Every attempt to convince the mind that it was wrong was betrayed by the body's own truth. Quicker breaths, trembling hands, the ache that lingered long after his presence was gone. The storm began quietly, almost gently, but soon it roared inside. Guilt came first, sharp and heavy, pressing like a stone on the chest. How could such thoughts even exist? How could desire form where it never should? Each night, the conscience tried to smother it, whispering shame, reminding of consequences, but desire was merciless. It refused to die. With every stolen glance, guilt deepened, but so did the longing. Fear was the shadow that followed everywhere. Fear of being discovered, fear of crossing a line that could never be undone, fear of what it would mean if the truth spilled out into the world. It was a battle between two selves, the one that clung to safety, morality, and silence, and the one that trembled with hunger, desperate to feel alive again. Both lived in the same body, pulling in opposite directions until it felt like the soul itself would tear apart. And then there were the glances. They carried more than words ever could. His eyes spoke in ways that left no escape. A single look across a room could undo days of careful restraint. It was as though his gaze stripped away every mask, every defense, leaving only raw vulnerability behind. There were moments when time itself seemed to stop, when a glance lingered too long and the unspoken truth became undeniable. The silence between them grew louder, filled with everything neither dared to confess. Those silences were the most dangerous of all. They wrapped around the heart like chains, heavy and intoxicating. In the quiet, the storm inside had no choice but to be felt fully. Each pause in conversation, each moment where words died on the lips, carried the weight of everything forbidden. It was agony and ecstasy all at once, to be so close and yet unable to touch, to want so desperately and yet remain still. The guilt gnawed constantly, like a wound that refused to heal. Nights were restless, torn between shame and desire. Dreams became dangerous, blurring the line between imagination and memory, waking with a heart pounding as though reality itself had been betrayed. The fear of losing control battled endlessly with the hunger to surrender, and in that battle the storm grew. There were moments of near collapse, times when the pull was so strong that the body leaned forward before the mind could stop it, when a word almost slipped, when a hand almost lingered too long. Each time, fear dragged it back into restraint, but the damage was already done. With every close call, the longing only grew more unbearable, like a fire smothered but never extinguished, waiting for the smallest spark to rise again. It became impossible to live as before. The storm colored everything, ordinary days now charged with restless energy, ordinary words now carrying secret meanings. Even laughter held tension, as though both knew the joy was hiding something deeper. Every effort to remain unchanged only highlighted how much had already changed. The struggle was relentless. To give in meant betrayal, yet to resist meant torment. Both paths hurt, both paths tore at the heart, but the storm gave no mercy. It demanded to be felt, and deep down, beneath all the guilt and fear, there was a terrifying truth. Part of the soul did not want the storm to end, because in that storm there was life, there was passion, there was the reminder of what it meant to feel. The silence after each stolen glance screamed louder than words. The spaces between touches carried more heat than the touch itself, and every moment spent resisting only made it clearer. The pull was not going away. The emotional storm was no longer something happening inside. It had become the air breathed, the weight carried, the rhythm of every day, and no matter how dangerous, no matter how forbidden, there was no denying it anymore. The heart was already his. It happened slowly at first, like the way night falls, soft shadows creeping in until the world is swallowed whole. The waiting, the resisting, the endless attempts to bury what had been burning for so long, all of it unraveled in one moment, a single breath where hesitation finally gave way to something far stronger. It wasn't planned, it wasn't spoken into existence, it was simply the breaking point where longing demanded to be answered. The night carried a stillness that felt different, as though the air itself knew what was about to happen. The silence between words grew too heavy, too charged, until it was impossible to pretend it was only silence. Every glance, every brush of his hand against mine, every pause in the conversation pulled tighter and tighter, until there was no space left for denial. Hearts beat too fast, breaths too shallow, and the room seemed to close in around us, as if the universe itself had sealed us away from the rest of the world. It wasn't one kiss, sudden and reckless, but a slow surrender, the kind where time seems to stretch, where the eyes meet and everything unspoken becomes louder than any confession could ever be. His hand reached out, not boldly, but carefully, as though giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't, I couldn't. When his fingers finally touched, the dam inside broke. It was soft at first, hesitant, trembling, but underneath it was an urgency that had been waiting far too long. The kiss that followed was both tender and desperate, like two souls starved of air finding breath only in each other. Every restraint built over weeks and months dissolved instantly, melted away in the warmth of lips pressed together, in the taste of something forbidden yet inevitable. My body betrayed every attempt at self-control, leaning closer, answering every touch with a hunger that felt endless. It wasn't just passion, it was the weight of years of silence shattering all at once. The kind of hunger that isn't only for the body, but for connection, for being seen, for being known so deeply it leaves no part untouched. When his arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer, there was no fear left, no guilt, only the overwhelming certainty that this was where I belonged. The urgency grew quickly, yet it was never careless. Every movement carried tenderness, as if he knew this moment was fragile, sacred, something that could not be rushed even in its desperation. Clothes became an obstacle, discarded with shaking hands, but even then, there was care in the way he touched, as though he was memorizing every inch, every curve, every scar. The first touch of skin against skin was enough to steal breath away, to blur the line between reality and dream. My body trembled not just from desire but from the vulnerability of being fully exposed, not only in flesh but in soul, and yet instead of fear there was safety. His hands were steady, his gaze unwavering, holding me as though I was both fragile glass and unmovable stone, as though he understood the paradox of my breaking and my strength. When he entered me, it was more than just bodies colliding, it was surrender. The letting go of walls built over years, the release of every ounce of restraint that had kept us apart. The rhythm began slow, careful, each thrust a conversation in itself, each moan an answer. And then it deepened, urgency taking over, the raw need spilling out like a flood that could no longer be contained. The sound of our breaths filled the room, tangled together, heavy and unsteady. My nails dug into his back, his grip tightened around me, and the world outside ceased to exist. There was only this fever, this trembling, this blending of bodies and souls into something so much larger than either of us alone. Passion burned hotter with every movement, but even in the fire there was tenderness. The way his lips found mine between gasps, the way his hands cradled my face as though reminding me I was cherished, not just desired, it was both chaos and calm, both storm and stillness, a paradox that made sense only in the way our bodies fit together. The climax came not just as pleasure, but as release, tears slipping from my eyes as the body shook, as years of silence, loneliness, and restraint poured out all at once. He held me through it, his forehead pressed to mine, whispering nothing and everything in the way he breathed my name. His own release followed, his body collapsing into mine, but even then he did not let go, as though afraid I might vanish if he loosened his hold. After, there were no words. There didn't need to be. The silence that had once tormented now felt sacred, filled not with longing, but with peace. His hand traced lazy patterns against my skin, and I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. The storm had broken, the walls had fallen, and what remained was something raw, something true, something that could never again be denied. The night of surrender had come, and in giving in, I had found myself again. What began as a secret pull, something dangerous and almost unbearable to admit, soon became the very center of life itself. At first, it was only stolen glances, charged silences, the heat of unspoken words pressed tight against the chest. It was passion that came with fear, desire tangled with guilt, but with each passing moment, with every touch, every confession hidden in the way eyes lingered too long, it began to change. What felt forbidden no longer seemed like a crime, but like a truth that had been waiting quietly for years to finally be lived. The transformation didn't happen in one night. It unfolded slowly, quietly, in the smallest of ways. The way his hand would reach for mine, not only in passion but in comfort. The way his laughter eased the weight of days that once felt heavy. The way his presence made every ordinary moment shimmer with meaning. The hunger that once consumed was still there, burning as fierce as ever. But beneath it something deeper was forming. Something that gave shape to the fire. Something that turned raw desire into belonging. Intimacy began to mean more than the fever of bodies pressed together. It became the moments after, lying in silence, listening to the rhythm of breath and heartbeat blending into one. It was in the tenderness of him brushing hair away from my face, in the way he whispered words that weren't meant to seduce but to soothe. It was in the quiet safety of his arms, where the chaos of the world could not intrude. Passion had opened the door, but love was what had walked through it, and it wrapped itself around me in ways that nothing else ever had. What once felt like losing control revealed itself as freedom. The surrender that once terrified me became the most beautiful gift, to give without fear, to love without restraint, to be seen without shame. In his eyes, I was not hidden, not diminished, not forgotten. I was whole, and in being whole, I could finally give myself completely. That kind of truth changes everything. It alters the meaning of intimacy, because it is no longer only about the fire of touch, but the depth of connection that makes every touch sacred. Belonging took on a new shape too. For so long, life had been lived behind walls, carefully built to protect against disappointment and loss. But with him, those walls were no longer needed. There was no pretending, no performance, no silence heavy with emptiness. There was simply presence, being known fully, flaws and all, and still being held close. That kind of belonging isn't about possession, but recognition. It is the unshakable feeling of being home, not in a place, but in a person. In truth, the hardest, most unforgiving part was no longer something to fear. At the beginning, everything had been shadowed by secrecy, by the weight of what could not be spoken aloud. But love has a way of stripping away the lies we tell ourselves. It demands honesty, not only with the other but with the self. The truth that was once terrifying became undeniable. This was not a mistake, not a passing weakness, not something to be erased or hidden. This was love, raw and real, and denying it would have been the only true betrayal. There was a shift that could not be ignored. What began as a forbidden attraction, something whispered only in the dark, became the brightest part of life. It redefined what it meant to be alive, what it meant to be wanted, what it meant to give. It turned fear into strength, guilt into clarity, longing into fulfillment. It wasn't about breaking rules anymore. It was about discovering the kind of love that rewrites every rule ever made. Every kiss held more than desire. It carried promise. Every embrace was more than comfort. It was belonging. Every whispered word wasn't just for the moment, but for a future that was being quietly built between us. The transformation was not only in the relationship, but in the very soul. To be touched by such love is to be changed forever, because once the heart knows that depth, it cannot go back to silence, cannot return to emptiness. This love became not just a part of life, but the very meaning of it. It wasn't stolen anymore. It was given freely. It wasn't a secret shame. It was a sacred truth. The forbidden had become the foundation, and what grew from it was stronger than anything imagined. And in that transformation, I found the most profound truth of all. Love like this is not simply lived. It becomes the reason to live. If this story touched something inside you, if you felt the pull of longing, the storm of guilt and desire, the surrender, and the transformation of love that can never be forgotten, then don't leave in silence. Subscribe so you never miss the next heartbeat, the next confession, the next truth whispered into the night. Like this story, if it spoke to you, share it with someone who believes in love's power to awaken the soul, and let us keep walking together through stories that remind us what it truly means to feel alive.